Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. Hey, everybody. So we just finished recording the Red Glare podcast, and I insisted we just hit record right now while we were in the studio and talking. So this is massive news. The Kraken are making a coaching change. Dan Bylsma we let go, and a full search will begin. This is from Elliot Friedman. I had to check several times to make sure this was a legitimate account, and it is. This looks
It's okay.
So I wanted to get our live reaction, Dylan. I mean, aside from the holy bleep, just the surprise element of it that we started off with. I mean, I can start for what are your first thoughts? I mean, wow, I'm still just trying to process this. I don't know if the video is going to go out. I just wanted to have it because this might be the most shocking news we've ever received live and been together here for.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, look, there was, I guess, there's been plenty that we've talked about this year about the systems not working and there not being adjustments to those systems to find something that did work. And so if you are a team, that's something that, if I'm management, I look at that and I go, this is not like the NFL where you're kind of locked into what you're going to do through training camp. And then it's a short season. You only have 17 games to deal with it. You've got 82 games. Things needed to be changed. We were talking about things needing to be changed in November that then were not changed the rest of the season. So if your management and you're, like, hey, what went on there? And you don't like the answer you got back from him after his exit interview, because that's where the timing of this really checks out, is my guess is they would have talked to him through, let's see, we talked to the players and him. Locker cleanout was Wednesday. If your management, you have the information from the players from that day, you probably talk with Dan Thursday, Friday, and then you think about this over the course of the weekend, and then you make the decision, obviously, this morning coming back to it. My guess is they did not like whatever answer he came back with, right? Like that's what it has to be.
Well, because I mean, we've been through this just last season, right? With the process and everything. Hackstall spoke to us; they did exit interviews, and and as Ron Francis said, because I think we had the chance to ask him about it too. Are you going to make a coaching change, whatever? And he was kind of non-committal because he said we have this process of evaluating everything that just takes some time, takes a few days. We'll come to a decision, and then we'll go from there. And that's ultimately what they did. And it sounds like that process has pretty much stayed the same.
Yeah, and so I think that that's part of this. I think. There was one, I'm wondering if this is the only announcement, right? Because if you're going to fire Dan, maybe you fire Ron too, and tomorrow becomes a very different press conference, or something. But like, I do wonder if the team wants to signal a recommitment to winning, and I wonder how that went last week with everything. And like Wiki's comments, and like, because that's the other thing that I immediately think to is like Wiki's answer was so not received well when asked, like, do you have to win next year? And he didn't just say yes, right? Like, he did not take the easy approach. He didn't take the obvious approach. He didn't really take the approach he needed to take, which was to say, yes, we do need to win next year. Like, if he had said that and then we see this, then it's like easy and it's okay. They just don't think Dan is the guy to get them there. This makes me think, like, almost like, I wonder if internally, based on the answer received from how that, like, what the fans had to say after like Wiki's comments there and how poorly received that was, almost if they like reevaluated, because it's still within that window to be thinking about coach and to be thinking about general manager. I wonder if that caused them to reevaluate things, or if ownership comes in and is like, hey, we need to be better next year and we're going to do something to commit to that.
Yeah, and I still have so many questions about what the overall big picture of this is, because if it's part of larger changes, like let's say if Francis is let go and we find that out tomorrow and all that sort of thing, then it makes sense in the fact that they're okay. If you're cleaning house, you're making the decision, you failed to meet expectations 2 years ago. That all makes logical sense, and that's I have some questions, but much fewer questions, right? But if this is just a coaching change, it's still kind of baffling to me, because how often does a GM get to pick 3 head coaches like this? And especially to fire one immediately after, 1 year after the other. this is just so rare. I'm going to go back when we're done recording this and just see how often that has happened, where a GM has fired a second coach and then 1 year later fired a third coach and stayed on as the GM.
Yeah, I
It just
can't
feels so rare.
I can't think of a time. The other thing is, if the player meetings ran long, right? Like
It did.
all of those meetings ran long. So if the players were not happy under him, or didn't feel like he gave them what they need to win, because I think that they would be happy under him. They all genuinely seem to like him. That was a pretty common thread when we talked to them, was they went out of their way at times to talk about what a great person he was and how they enjoyed Dan as a man, right? If they were saying, look, we love this guy, but we don't think he's got it, or I don't think that we can win, or this system just does not fit what we are, who we are. I can't play in this system. I can't, be this guy that's going to go up that 200 feet and play that way. That's just not who I am. And there's multiple guys saying that, then that would be another thing where if your management, what do you like, you have to make a move, right? If you go to him and you're like, dude, you got to change up the system, and he's refusing to change the system, then yeah, you would have to move him, because at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to, if you are having to go through a system change, it's a lot easier to fire the coach than it is to bring in 22 new players.
Yeah, I mean, it is the easier option of the two. We talked about this with Hackstall, right? It's the easiest lever that you can pull, as rather than kind of remaking the entire roster in that case.
But you should have known that last year. Like, it's only 1 year.
Yeah, and that's what's really baffling to me. If Francis does stay a part of this, is that this, I think, just again signals another failure that you picked the. Well, okay, actually, no. This is what I'm thinking now.
Yes.
Remember those reports
begin with? Yes.
from Elliot Friedman that he didn't want, and this was even back to last summer, that this is not the coach that Ron Francis wanted. That seems a lot more likely in light of this news.
Sense. Yeah, that makes
Wouldn't that make the most sense? And so that, let's say, again, I don't want to speculate here or say that's what happened, but if it was the case that Francis advocated for somebody else, like a Todd McClellan or whoever else, and other factions in the front office won out, and it was Bylsma, and Francis were to say, this was one of the reasons that the roster didn't perform, we didn't have the coach I wanted to go with, and he had full belief from ownership and everybody that, he's the guy you want leading the charge, as Todd Leiweke did seem to confirm certainly the other day, that maybe they then give him the option to go out and pick somebody that he wanted. But man, it would also, I mean, again, if that's the case, it would also be kind of rough that that's how it would ended up being decided last year.
Right. And it's also, I mean, it's so, like, what does that say about things internally too? Right.
It's a real indictment on something going on internally.
Right. It shows that there is
process should be made.
Yeah, no, like that's not what you want. You don't want your GM making firing a guy after 1 year just to like kind of prove his point, so to speak, which is essentially what we're talking about, which is just like, hey, I didn't think this was going to work. It didn't work. So now you all have to listen to me. Like, I don't think that that's a great look. I would understand why Ron would do it, especially given that Ron must be feeling pressure for this roster to be better and for this team to perform better ultimately, just because, I mean, again, we've talked about not many GMs go through as many losing seasons as he has gone through without showing any sign of improvement, right? Like, this is not like a team that actively got better this year, despite the change in coach, the way normally a team would. And I think that is definitely something. It's surprising because for so much of the last part of the season, everybody just felt like, yeah, it wasn't that bad. Even though it was, but that's the way like the organization talked about it. That's the way the players seemingly talked about it. Obviously Dan was saying that, but also Ron and all the indications we got from upper management and ownership was just like, it wasn't that bad, even though it really was. And so in some ways I'm actually like, I'm not happy because I really liked Dan and I thought what he was doing was good, but I am happy in the sense that like, this is our first indication finally that like results do matter for this team, because like Hackstall, you could just make the argument of like, well, it's 3 years. It's kind of like when it runs its course anyway. And they had to make a move. So they did something. This is the first time they've really made a move that is like, purely and strictly, because it's only a 1-year opportunity for Dan. Results matter. And it is a results driven business, and it is a results driven league, and the results were not there. And therefore he doesn't have a job anymore.
Right. And I was getting ready to, whenever we finished talking to Ron, in a couple of days, and we did the season retrospective. And I think I talked about it on the mailbag too, where I said, you look at accountability for results. And I said, Vegas was like a 10 or 11 because it was a question about Vegas, and Seattle was maybe a 2, maybe among the least accountability for results of most teams in the NHL. And I mean, this certainly bumps that number up. That's for sure. I mean, it really just changes the narrative there. Now, we'll have to see if this is part of larger changes and what the whole picture is. But it's tough because I don't have a problem with it from that perspective, I guess. I want to see changes after a season like this. And I think that's why I was pushing and saying, like, look, it's not okay that everyone's just saying this is fine. It's not fine. And I think this is at least partially the organization realizing that. I think this shows that somebody internally realizes the season that just happened is not okay and is not acceptable. And for that reason, I'm happy to see it, because I was really worried that the organization's opinion and approach from top to bottom was that what we just saw the last 2 years is okay and acceptable. And clearly that's not the case. I mean, this firing shows that's not the case. And so I'm happy from that perspective. On the other hand, I do feel like this doesn't, if this is it, it doesn't really address the problem. And I think it is also a little unfair to Dan too. I know
massively.
I think a little unfair is an understatement. It's unfair to Dan given, I just don't think he is the root of the problem here. And to, just give him the 1 year is, it just sucks for him too. I hate, seeing this, because I think we both, like Dan, we figured that if Francis was going to be back and you were going to go, where you weren't making wholesale changes, that the coaching staff at the very least deserved to be back, because they seemed like among the least of the team's problems. But I mean, that's just what it is. So I'm sorry, I'll let you talk here. I'm still trying to gather my thoughts. I guess this hasn't been the most coherent.
It comes down to, if you are at a point where as an organization things are unacceptable and a move has to be made, again, if you don't feel comfortable going all the way with the front office, or again, if there was a split in the coaching decision last year and the front office, really Ron felt the way that he did and could use this year to back up what his thinking was last offseason in those discussions, Dan is the only piece that can be moved, right? Because again, you're not going to wholesale change the core of this team, or you can't yet. So if you are looking to signal that this team wants to behave differently moving forward, and that results do matter, and that this is a team and an organization that expects to win and is going to demand winning moving forward, which is all steps that they needed to take, Dan is the one that goes. And I think that it is massively unfair to him because, one, he was only here for 1 year. 2, he did a lot of work for your organization already. And if the reason Ron is still around is going to be because he's done a lot of work for your organization, and this is kind of what like Wiki talked about last week, was how much work Ron put into really starting the Seattle Kraken. If that's the reason that he's being given the long lead, for Dan not to be given that, given he helped establish basically everything in Coachella for you in a lot of ways, and what the identity of your farm system is going to be, and the types of players you're looking for, and all of that stuff. I mean, he was around when they were in Charlotte, right, sharing an AHL team before the Firebirds even existed. I think it's unfair to him to not give him that same little bit of leeway that they're apparently giving Ron for what he's put in, at least again according to Liwiki. And then the other thing is, genuinely, Dan was trying to do, like, the systems Dan was running, I agree the team didn't run them well, and that they did need to change it up based on personnel, but the systems themselves are what all of the teams we just talked about in the postseason are running, right? Like, he was trying to make this team play the style and game that successful NHL teams play. And if the roster can't handle it, again, that should be a signal to you that the front office has not done its job, not that the coach hasn't done his job. because the coach is trying to do what other teams are working, what's working right now in the NHL. And it didn't work for you mainly because you just didn't have enough talent to do it. And that's a problem.
Yeah, and if the roster can't handle it under two coaches who had two very different approaches.
Different styles.
Exactly. And so we've seen now that the roster assembled by Ron Francis just cannot handle that way of playing, really under two coaches with very different styles. I don't know what more you would expect to see from a third coach unless you can have really significant wholesale roster changes. And Francis hasn't really done anything to suggest that he's the guy that can make that happen. And so this is where I'm still concerned. Again, I like that we're seeing some accountability here from this organization, but I worry that I still don't know how you really fix this with just a coaching change. And it's nice to see the accountability, but if the accountability, if the man who's really in charge is immune from accountability, does that really solve anything? And that's kind of my next question for the organization is, where do you go from here? And if you are 100% sold on Ron Francis and his vision and everything that he wants to do, you know, where has that led you to the point where you've had to fire two coaches in a row? And I guess what is the limit to that vision? I mean, when do you decide that that vision isn't what you want to be totally sold on, and where you would make a change there?
Right. And that's, I wish I could answer that. I wish I was in a position to be able to answer that, or again, not have us be even in the spot to ask a question like that. But yeah, that's going to be a really interesting one that they're going to have to answer for tomorrow. I think I'm assuming again that we're gonna talk to Ron tomorrow. Obviously, that conversation
it has been scheduled officially with the team at 1 p.m. tomorrow. It's a Ron Francis media availability. So as far as we know right now, we haven't gotten another email or whatever. That is still on the books. I have questions I prepared. I'm going to prepare a lot more questions now. But one of the questions I had prepared was just, and a very simple one, I think, for Ron is, what is the standard for on-ice success for this organization? And what is the timeline by which you expect to achieve that standard? And I still don't know the answer to that question, but I'm looking forward, especially in light of this move, to clarification on that. Because this tells you that, because I was starting to think also that maybe the organization's thinking was looking at this roster and everything and saying, okay, this might be more of a 2 to 3 years from now kind of build to really get competitive, but we're going to be comfortable with that. And we're going to be extra patient, and we're going to, kind of work that way and let everything grow. But this coaching change is completely antithetical to that.
It is. And so it's frustrating in some ways that, like, again, we're like having to start over with kind of where this organization is from a thinking, like where their thought process is. What's up?
So I'm reading now from David Pagnotta. Sounds like the Kraken may also be making a GM change, though word is Francis would remain in the organization if a change occurs. So that would make a lot more sense.
That makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
And so if they do make a GM change, that would be logical, certainly, with wanting to change things. And I understand Francis remaining in the organization, given that he's built so much of all the stuff off the ice and was part of building all of that. So that would make a lot more sense as well. And now it's a whole other thing to react to. And, who we
this is just turned into an impromptu deep dive, as we're already almost.
It really did. Again, sorry, fine. Dylan. I didn't mean, I know you've had
good
plans today and all this stuff, but if there was ever a time for an emergency pod, this is it.
Yeah. And obviously, again, full thoughts on everything will come on the true season, recap in the next day or two. But yeah, I mean, like, this is significant. So look, it's one of those where we saw it a lot all this year, right? Was people commenting, leaving comments on post-game lives, the next morning, even all of that stuff. And it's something that I think comes from other sports where it's very easy and natural to be like, okay, the team's not performing, fire the coach, right? Like, that is just that's like how it's done. The NFL, team's not performing, you fire the coach, right? Like, that's just what's done. Coaches turnover in that league all the time. Coaches turnover in the NBA quite a bit.
I'm sorry, Dylan. I hate to keep interrupting you here.
No, it matters.
This from Arthur Staple at The Athletic. Hearing there will also be a change in the Seattle front office. Jason Botterill, new GM. Ron Francis will be team president.
Okay. So
it sounds like it'll be Botterill. Which is what I kind of feared, but
yeah, I don't necessarily love that either. again, it's kind of odd that you're going to get rid of the guy that was the coach in those Buffalo situations, Dan Bylsma, and then bring in the general manager there. I mean, that gives us somewhere to go, because I was basically killing time for that announcement there.
Yeah.
But I was going to say that, like, look, at some point, Kraken fans, if you're going to be the kind of fan that's going to be like, this team's not winning, that pisses me off, fire the coach. Understand that now we've gone through 2 coaches. There is a significant element of this that is just the roster. And if you want the roster to be better, and you're the type of fan that does get upset when the team loses like that kind of consistently, and wants that knee-jerk change, understand that it's hard to do in hockey, and that the change that you actually want really is on the roster. Now, as for this, ideally, I probably would have wanted somebody from outside the organization, RJ, not just Jason Botterill. I understand why they're doing this. It's felt like this for a while. We talked about this really all season long as a potential option for them. And here it is, made official. I know you're probably tweeting right now, so I can keep talking until you're done. But
No,
Jason
it's okay.
Botterill coming in.
I can't get it out in time.
We're going to have this out before anybody else. So
that's true. This is fine. That's important. So anyway, I mean, with Jason Botterill coming in, I really would have liked to see an outside hire, somebody from outside the organization, because I still am very skeptical about the overall vision. And I think Ron Francis will still have a lot of say probably in the roster stuff. It should be Botterill kind of handling, the day-to-day things. I don't know. We'll see exactly the details on that role. We'll find out a lot more tomorrow if that press conference goes ahead. But I have concerns about Botterill's record in Buffalo and as a GM, and we've gone over his history and everything, and I'm still concerned about the general vision that has led the team to this point, where they feel the need to make all these changes, and not going with somebody from outside the organization. I'm still very concerned about that, but I still think it's preferable to not doing anything, because at least then you have somewhat of a mandate from the organization and from ownership and up top that there is that accountability there. And if things aren't working, we are going to make changes. The thing I was most concerned about was the complacency and the acceptance of mediocrity from this organization. I felt like the organization was very, very close to heading in that path. And I was all ready to talk about how the organization basically accepted that path to be okay with mediocrity. And at least this change shows that that's not the case. I think this shows as clearly as you can possibly show it that that is not the case, and they still feel the need to make change if things aren't working. So I'm happy with that. Don't love the exact changes that they made, but I feel like I can only ask for so much, if that makes sense,
Yeah, no, this is a start, and it is something. And obviously, we don't want to judge Botterill as general manager of this team before he's done anything.
That's true. I want to reserve judgment until we see what he does.
Yeah, that would not be fair. And I do think that there is something. I'm a big second chance person. I'm somebody that does believe that, especially when you're in complicated positions like being a general manager for an NHL team, or being a head coach at the NHL level, when there's so many things going on like that, there's only so much you can do to prepare to be in that position. And I think the first time that you're in one of those positions, you're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn from those. And I think the fact that he went through that, and the learning experiences of everything in Buffalo, he's had several years now to regroup after that, to be an assistant GM again, to be part of a different organization, have more life experience, have more NHL experience. Generally, when we see these things, that does bode well for somebody's second job opportunity, right? Is they're able to learn from maybe the mistakes that happened the first time around. Really, you're not entering it eyes wide shut kind of so much, right? The way you are the first time you're ever elevated to a position like that. So I do think that, there is hope in that regard. And I'll kind of choose to believe that for now, until we're given a reason not to. I will believe that he'll have learned some lessons from Buffalo and be able to apply that and do a better job in Seattle.
Yeah, and I want to say just thank you, Dylan, for putting me in a little bit better mindset here, because I think I just needed to hear that. Because you're right, I think we should judge him on the moves that he makes in this job and this organization. I think it's, it would be wrong to just use his past tenure to make a judgment before he even starts on the job. So I think that's, that's kind of how we should approach it. It's how I should approach it. As much as I think the problem is that I was just, for the last few months,
Yeah,
hearing
no, you've been very in
that
here.
and so there were, I don't want to even say like rumblings, but just for speculation from media or whatever, that if Francis, maybe he could be moved to like a president of hockey ops type of thing because of the culture stuff. It would make sense in some ways. And then thinking, okay, well, if they go internal, who's the GM guy? It'd probably be Botterill. So I'd already thought about the idea a little bit, and it's the kind of thing that that maybe I had developed some fear around. But you know what? In this circumstance, I'll certainly take it over where I thought we were headed even a day ago.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think we'll have time to dig in more into maybe what role
I need to look
he
more at
was
his record.
in with the Kraken. I know his role from Buffalo pretty well, and look, to be honest, his role in Buffalo was one where he didn't do a lot. It was not marked by a lot of activity either in the trade market, free agency wise. Like the biggest contract and really the only notable contract signed by him, if I'm remembering right, was the Jeff Skinner extension, which I know it ended up aging very poorly for Buffalo, but that was really like the one big thing there. Had a couple trades that were kind of significant. One that was part of Buffalo selling off when he came in, and then what was the second one? We'll have it more when we have time.
We
to
will do
prepare.
a proper deep dive on all of
But
that.
what I want to know is, what was his role with the Kraken these last several years? Because he's been around. He's been an assistant general manager here. What has he overseen? Has it been more on the, amateur scouting side of things and the development there? Has it been working with the Firebirds and growing the farm system there? All of those things I think is going to be also maybe telling as to why he it's been decided that he is the one to take over, and maybe what Kraken fans can expect. I do think that, again, saying what we do know from his Buffalo tenure, like, again, just from thinking about this in the past, it was not marked by a lot of movement with the roster. They have said, and they've set this roster up to be moved around a lot. I think that already is going to be, different from anything that happened in Buffalo under Jason Botterill, and we're going to see something different here because, again, they have those picks. They're not going to be making those picks. They're going to be active in some shape or form in the trade market. I also wonder now if they are signaling this where the results do matter and they do have to make changes and they do want to get back to winning. Do we see a more notable member of the team traded at some point this offseason, whether it does become a Jared McCann or a Vince Dunn, or is it, maybe somebody more still in the top six, maybe up front, or an Adam Larson on defense beyond just a Jamie Alexiak, something like that. I do wonder if we now start seeing that accountability reach down to the roster here soon.
I think it certainly opens the door to that. If you're making all of these changes, I mean, that's that definitely opens the door to it. So I think we could see that. I mean, gosh, going into this offseason, everybody is going to at least be in conversations and on the table. They're going to be listening on everyone. This signals that. And so we'll see what comes of it. But also going back to the Buffalo thing with Botterill too, I think it is worth noting, and I said this with Dan Bylsma too, coming into Seattle, and of course he didn't have a very good tenure in Buffalo. Nobody has been able to make that work still in Buffalo. I think there is something that even goes as high as ownership.
I was just going to say ownership is a part of it.
And so everybody who's worked under that, I think you kind of have to grade on at least a little bit of a curve in that they've all failed, but maybe there's another reason behind all of their collective failure. And I think you're seeing it with Buffalo too. And I was going to get into this in a couple days when we talked Kraken, and assuming they weren't going to make these changes, I was going to compare them to Buffalo as really the only two teams in the NHL that have accepted this kind of level of results and have been so adamant against making changes. I thought the fact that Kevin Adams still was the GM of the Buffalo Sabres was just ridiculous. And I was going to compare it to Ron Francis still being the GM of the Seattle Kraken and them not making any changes there. And I think you're seeing a difference now between the dysfunction of an organization like Buffalo and, the hopefully better functioning, I'll say better functioning of an organization like the Seattle Kraken. And so, you talk the Buffalo comparisons, like, they're still hanging on to a Kevin Adams. Like they do not realize when change needs to be made and all that stuff. So I I think that is good reason to, maybe pump the brakes on Botterill's tenure with the Buffalo Sabres and kind of judge him from a clean slate. Now, one more thing I want to say, because there's another bit of news here. This one from John Shannon, basically confirming the Friedman report that Bylsma has let go. He says, though, FYI, Jessica Campbell has been retained.
Okay.
So that was one of my other questions too, when we thought it might just be a coaching change, is what happens to the assistants, and particularly, does Jess Campbell stick around? Sounds like she will, which I think that's good news. I think that maybe the responsibilities need to change a little bit. We've talked about this. I think they need to bring in a power play specialist, maybe move Jess to, kind of still an assistant coach, but like working on more of the skills-based stuff like she's really good at, like she has more experience with. And we'll learn a whole lot about that later when you see the coaching staff, start to take place again and all that. But I'm happy to see that she's still in the org.
Yeah. And even I also wonder about if I don't know how the contracts are structured with all of this, but if they retain her and based on how contracts are structured, if that means that maybe she gets kicked back down to Coachella Valley, or maybe it's something where you make a move with Laxdal down there and you could see something there. But I don't know how those contracts are structured. Like if she now is under an NHL level coaching contract, and so that would have to be negotiated, something like that. I don't know. But I do think that, especially for somebody as young as she is, it makes sense if you believe in her potential as a coach at the National Hockey League level, it makes sense to keep her around and not have her be one and done, and particularly keep her around under different head coaches so that she can learn different lessons. Because if you've been in any sort of job where you've had a mentor or somebody that you've had to work closely with that's above you and has the more experience and all of that stuff, that having different mentors, having different people in leadership positions above you, you learn different things from them. Even if you're doing the same job and you're in the same role, just that person being different, you are learning different things from them. And I think that when you're talking about a coach who is in their early 30s, who is very much new to coaching, like, again, she hasn't been coaching for like 10 years as somebody in a behind the bench role, right? This is one of those things where I do think that it is probably beneficial for her long term to be a part of somebody else's staff, because up until this point, it's basically just been Dan Bylsma, right? Like the, obviously Team Germany for the international stuff before Dan, but really being a part of a full season, like kind of regular org, a professional team. It has only been under Dan Bylsma that she has worked. I think having her be a part of somebody else's staff is going to be part of her development long term, and I think she has a lot of potential long term. I think the Kraken probably do as well, and that's why they're keeping her around. But if I'm somebody in her position, obviously it sucks when your boss gets fired. You probably feel partially responsible, all that
person
stuff.
Who brought you into coaching like that too.
Yeah, like that's got to be really, really difficult if you are her. But I would, I would grieve that for a day, and then I would think about, okay, this is an opportunity for me. I can work with somebody else, learn some other lessons. Let me use this as an opportunity to reevaluate what I did, all of that kind of stuff. That's just kind of how I think about something like that. But good to know that, because I know already on Discord, like that's been a big part of the conversation, is people wondering about Jess Campbell, so that is important there. I can say again, take this with a grain of salt because it is Wikipedia, but looking into Jason Botterill, just kind of the path that he took after playing, went and got an MBA after he finished playing, then joined the NHL offices and the NHL Central Registry for a season, then went and scouted with the Dallas Stars for a season before being hired in Pittsburgh. First worked as director of hockey administration there, where he monitored the salary cap and contract research for negotiations. So kind of a history there. 2 years later was promoted to assistant general manager in Pittsburgh, where he held that title for 5 years before being interim general manager with them, and then being back down to an associate general manager. And then 10 years, almost 10 years after joining the Penguins, almost 10 years exactly, just 2 months shy of that, got the Buffalo job and was there for 3 years before being let go, and then joined the Kraken And it just, from what I can see, it's just assistant general manager. Doesn't have specific duties the way his tenure in Pittsburgh kind of has things laid out, but gives like an idea. Has worked a little bit in scouting, has worked a little bit on contract side, salary cap stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And I'm really curious, again, what he's been handling for the Kraken over the last few years as assistant GM, because they usually do have pretty defined roles. And so that's going to be one of the first questions that we ask tomorrow. And so, yeah, I mean, there's just a whole lot to digest, Dylan. I mean, any other questions, thoughts that come to your mind?
No, I mean, I'm curious to see what direction they go with a head coach. I wonder if
that was the other. What do you think they look for in a new head coach?
Right, because I think that's going to be a big thing. I'm wondering if look, both Dan Bylsma, both Dave Hackstall were kind of guys where they were not like the win at all costs kind of coach. They weren't the hardo all the time. Like that's not really who they were. They weren't going to be that person that was going to really ride the roster and ride those guys and really push them and demand from them better performance. Like that's just not their philosophies. It's certainly not Dan Bylsma's philosophy. If Ron wanted somebody more like a Todd McClellan that could be more of that philosophy, where it is more of like, hey, this is the system and you figure it out, otherwise you're gone. If that's kind of more of the direction that they're going to go with. I also wonder if maybe some of the other coaching moves around the NHL played a role in this, like Laviolette getting fired with the Rangers. Does that make them go, hey, that's somebody that we could potentially want to bring in here? I mean, I'm sure they'll talk to him. They'd be dumb not to talk to him. But I do wonder if that's something where they saw somebody like that. I don't know that they'd go down the Torts road, but I again, it would be a 180 if you think you need it, but I wouldn't. But I do wonder with like a Laviolette, if they look at somebody like that and they're like, hey, this is maybe what this roster needs, given that it does feel like it's a roster issue, it's a player issue. If you can't, again, turn over 8 guys on the roster in one offseason and try to make the team better, just replace 8 guys with 8 better guys. Everybody hopes they could do that. It's not really possible. I do wonder if that's maybe the direction they go, is to try to find a coach that's going to put the squeeze on the player group and see if that gets them going for the first time, gets them to play consistently and everything with effort.
That's my first thought on it too. And you look at the 2 coaches that they've had, and I think Bylsma and that staff did bring a little bit more accountability for especially the veterans than Dave Hackstall did, but it's still, again, on that scale, not beyond, I'd say, a 5, right? Compared to other coaches. And they haven't really had that kind of hardo coach that you were talking about. And then another thing too, is that you look at really the 2 coaching hires that they've made under Ron Francis and Dave Hackstall and Dan Bylsma. And you ask too, were any other teams really interested in interviewing these guys? Was there any competition to get these guys? Not really. I don't think Dave Hackstall was really that sought after a commodity at the time when the Kraken hired him. I remember it was a surprise to us, unlike a Rick Tocchet or someone who had the 3 interviews and other teams wanted him. And I'm sorry, I hate to say this, but I feel like same thing with Dan Bylsma. I'm sure there were other teams that were maybe looking around, but when in that coaching carousel in the search, there weren't a whole lot of other teams that we heard asking about Dan Bylsma.
No.
And so I do wonder if you go with maybe just a more established name for the first time, somebody that, I don't know, other teams might also want, and maybe that could improve. That is something that you haven't really tried before, is bringing in a coach that, I don't know, is in high demand. And I think, that could be, part of the answer, I think too, is, that if you have a coach that's a bigger name. I know we've talked about the real marquee names like DeBoer or Montgomery, these guys that are all taken or whatever. And it's rare that those guys become available, but if you can find somebody, I mean, who knows what Rick Tocchet's future is in Vancouver.
I was just going to say, it sounds like that could be sketchy, or if Vancouver needs to kind of blow things up this offseason.
And as somebody who was also interviewed for the Kraken job originally, and maybe
very close relationship with Ron. Yep.
So that's a name that comes to mind immediately, but I think it would be beneficial for the team to hire somebody that, that other teams are looking at. And it really would be a first for the organization.
And it does feel like this is a consistent problem under both coaching staffs, or both head coaches, has been an issue of the players listening to that coach, right? The players like really engaging with them and respecting them is the bottom line, right? Like bringing in somebody that does have a more proven NHL track record that truly demands respect in the room, right? And that demands that accountability, and players are going to be like, damn, if I take this shift off, I'm absolutely going to be hearing about it. Like again, it's something I think that's worth trying. That's not the coaching that I totally believe in. It's I think something where we've talked about this on the Red Glare several times. Coaches like that do not last long. They have a shorter shelf life because guys at some point that message does get lost and they're just like, you know what, this guy's just going to ride me no matter what I do. I might as well not give it 110%, right? Like that does become the issue with them. But again, when you're talking about this roster specifically, obviously there's a talent level portion of that. They can't totally control that, right? No player can just go and magically become a better version of themselves overnight. But the other side of the equation has been they are inconsistent. They don't always have effort. It doesn't always feel like they have effort anyway. Maybe it is their max effort, in which case, again, that's another problem that you got to deal with. But we've talked about this the last 2 years where effort has been called into question at multiple points during a season. If you can find a coach that can demand consistency and demand effort, and not just demand them, but actually get those out of these guys, this team is better. And so if you can find a coach out there who can do that, I think then yes, making the change from Dan Bylsma is the right call, because that is the one thing. It did not appear like he was able to do that this year.
No, I think the record and the results in the game speaks for itself. And I was gonna be on this in our podcast that'll now never get recorded because of the changes. But I didn't like that I felt like the coaching staff and even the players a bit were kind of resting on their laurels in the last 19 games of the season, talking about how they played a lot better and they saw a lot of good things there. And I felt like that still wasn't good enough. And you look at the whole body of work, and it simply wasn't good enough from the players, from the coaches, from everybody. And I think at least this signals that the organization up at the top kind of agrees. And so having a coach that'll bring a little bit more accountability, I think would be a good thing. Dylan, if you could pick right now, and I know we'll get into it as we learn a lot more, but if you could pick the next coach of the Seattle Kraken right now, pick any name you want that I guess is not currently an NHL coach, but I'll throw Tocchet in there.
Right.
That is not under contract next season as an NHL head coach. Who are you picking?
Well, I was going to say, as much as I believed in everything that I just said, I mean, I would say David Carle, like be the team that gives him the opportunity. Even
I would
though
love
that flies
that would be the guy. Yes,
everything we just talked about, right? Bringing in the college coach, but very much somebody who is in demand, who has success both not only at the NCAA level, but also at the international level, coaching the Team USA at World Juniors and things like that. I just think because you are going to be a young team, right? As much as they want to aggressively get better and try to get better quickly, the bottom line is the core of this team is still going to be Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, Berkeley Catton, the other young prospects you have, like such as Yanni Newman, even a young addition that you traded for in Capo Caco. Like that is the core group of your team. Bringing in somebody who is proven to work extremely well with young players like that, I think is the way to go. If you're going to go in the direction that I talked about, though, where you're going to bring in more of a hardo, somebody who's going to demand respect and really try to fix the effort level of this team using, by bringing down the hammer, I think you cannot do better than Rick Tocchet. I think what's going to be interesting is Rick Tocchet's going to make them play a very similar system to what Dan was trying to make them play. But it would be very interesting if the different approaches where Dan approaches them on a more human level versus Rick Tocchet just demanding that they do it and pulling them out of the lineup if they can't, if that would have a different effect, because obviously it doesn't look like this roster could maybe handle it, that kind of skating game. But that's what he's been running in Vancouver if you're Rick Tocchet. But I do think Rick Tocchet is a very good coach. And I think that if you're going in that direction, he's the guy to go with.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to just agree
If
with
he's
you on
available.
all points here. That's the thing, if he's available. I hate to agree with you on all points because I think you have to make a decision, right? Are you aggressively going for it next season? And we'll ask about this, of course, too, what the idea is for next season, because, with Todd Lewicki, is winning a must next year, kind of backed away from that. And so I do wonder if they still have that approach or what's going on. But if you're going for the winning right away, I think you have to bring in a coach like Tocchet, somebody who will bring that accountability, somebody who is experienced, somebody who is sought after by other teams. That said, looking at the roster, like I still think this is
You're not
probably
winning.
realistically a multi-year fix. Like, I'm sorry, Ron Francis has kind of dug you into a hole here roster wise that is going to take more than an offseason realistically to get out of. Maybe Botterill can work some amazing magic, but I don't know.
Who's Mitch Marner's favorite coach? Bring in that guy.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, well, did he like Sheldon Keefe or no?
I don't know.
Okay. So yeah, maybe that's the answer or something too. So maybe there's some magic there, and we aren't anticipating it right now. But I think so, given that looking at the roster just seems like a multi-year fix, David Carle would absolutely be my dream hire for that, because I think he fits the timeline with your young guys. He's going to be a fantastic NHL coach. I mean, I think he checks the box that there are other teams interested. Certainly.
Definitely.
I
We
mean,
know
he is
they
in
are.
high
The
demand,
Rangers
even
wanna
though he's
talk
not
to him.
experienced. Right. So I think that would be a fantastic hire as well. And I'm sure we'll do a whole deep dive on, just because I remember we have been through this last time, right? We did we looked at all the different candidates. We brought out like 10 different people it could be. And so we're going to probably do that again at some point. But that's just our initial thoughts on the coaching there.
Yeah, the difference this time around is, like, in the past we've looked at like AHL coaches first time, like we really looked at Ryan Warsofsky last year.
Yeah.
Right? Like, who's now coach of the San Jose Sharks. And I think that I was much more open to something like that. Like David Carle is the only non-experienced NHL coach that I would be comfortable with at this point. Like, I am in a different place than before, where last year it was very much like, yeah, bring in somebody that this is their first gig, let them grow with your guys and everything like that. And give them that opportunity, and let's try to find some fresh voices in the NHL and all of that. No, unless it's David Carle, who pretty universally everybody agrees is just on a different level. I want an experienced NHL head coach. I want somebody who has been there, done that before, that the players are going to respect, that they're going to try for, because I just think that is what this team needs right now. Like you have tried it the other way. Dan was the other way of doing this. He was bringing in an AHL coach, even though he had NHL experience. You brought in the guy that was going to connect with your roster on a human level and be a nice guy, and have long conversations with them, and ask them about off ice stuff before he gets to the on ice stuff. Like, you just had that in Dan Bylsma, and it didn't matter. Like, it didn't matter at all. And so I think that that's an important lesson to learn if you're the Seattle Kraken, is with this group, that doesn't matter. Maybe it matters for some of them, some of the players. Like, I do still wonder about a Shane Wright and how well he's worked with him and helped him develop. But obviously, as a whole, it does not matter with this group. So you might as well try somebody who's maybe going to be more distant from them, but is going to be harder on them, and hopefully command that respect.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, I thought this could be just a fun little exercise as I look at the playoff brackets, because we just recorded the Red Glare about the playoff predictions and everything. I mean, are there any coaches you think could shake loose if they say have a first round exit that you might be interested in?
Okay, well,
I mean, think DeBoer is safe in Dallas?
I don't know about DeBoer, especially after how the regular season ended in Dallas. If that series is over quick, I could see them wanting a new face behind the bench, just because they're locked into this roster now. They've doubled down on their roster. Obviously, they haven't gotten to where they need to go. I think Pete DeBoer would be available there. I do wonder at some point if Pete DeBoer is going to want to take a year off before just constantly joining these different situations, or maybe joining.
And I don't know why he would take the Kraken job.
Well, I was just going to say, unless joining a team like the Kraken would be kind of like that step back, where you
pressure-wise,
can pressure-wise, and he could grow with a roster, right? Yeah, the kind of thing. So I do wonder about that. We mentioned on it that at some point Bruce Cassidy is going to run his course with Vegas, and we think that that's maybe getting close, but we weren't thinking this year. But if they were to say, fall to an LA or Edmonton in round 2, and it wasn't pretty, I wonder about something like that there. But otherwise, I mean, looking at the playoffs, like I don't think so. Like, Carolina gets bounced in the second round. Like, they really doubled down on Brindamore last offseason.
I don't think they let him go. Of course, if they do, then I'm sure that's someone that
you're interested in.
At. But I mean, you've been talking about John Cooper. If Tampa loses in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, if Tampa loses again, I do wonder about John Cooper. But again, like, if you're John
Cooper, but I don't know why he would take the job. But you offer.
I don't know why you take the job. I don't know why you take any job. Like, what if you're John Cooper? Why do you not just take a year at that point too?
Yeah, I would, unless some great situation opens up or something. So I don't know. It's going to be an interesting just match for who would take the job versus who, who the Kraken would want. So I mean, we'll get into that a whole lot deeper later, but it's going to be an exciting offseason, Dylan.
Yes,
More
it
so
is.
than we thought.
Yeah, no, I'm actually kind of looking forward to that because I was really looking forward to doing our season recap in the next couple days, and we might as well just call this a deep dive at this point. I'll add the graphic and
It's
everything,
a
and
full
we'll
deep
just
dive. Which,
release
by
it.
the way, big thanks to Rico Tessendor, our wonderful
I was
sponsor.
waiting.
You have the script?
I was gonna do something around it being an emergency podcast, and if you have an emergency, you can call Rico. Well, after you call first responders, of course. that
is the
start
correct
there.
order. Yes,
Rico's the second call you make, but he's up there. But yes, definitely shout out to the offices of Rico Tessendor and all that. But yeah, no, I was really looking forward to doing that season recap and really kind of talking about things, and especially with what they're doing off ice with the season ticket, discounts, making more family packages available, lowering ticket costs. And I do think that signaled one thing about the team kind of understanding where they were at and what they were, which was not a winning franchise, for lack of a better term, right? Like if you see yourself as a franchise that has been winning, you're not doing that, right? You're not slashing season ticket packages by 40%. That doesn't happen. But if if you do think that things have not gone well, that's something that you do. And so maybe that was our first clue, was they really did not believe that things were going well. And it also might be our first clue into how long they think this could take. That if you think it's just a 1-year blip and it's a fire the coach and you can get right back at it next year, maybe you don't take those steps ticket wise. But I do wonder now if this is taking everything big picture, if this is them signaling that, yeah, they're not where they want to be for sure. They understand they're not where fans want them to be. And then they also know that it can't be fixed in one off season.
yeah, I could see that being the case,
which is very reasonable that it can't be fixed in one off season.
It is. I mean, and this is why I've been talking about that Francis probably shouldn't be the GM anymore, is because he's put them in a situation where this probably can't be fixed over one off season. I said, why would you give the guy who's done that the keys still and just not admit that anything's wrong? But it seems like they've made a change here. So I'm a lot more excited for this off season and for next season. I'm a lot more excited for next season than I otherwise would have been.
Yeah.
I think there was, I mean, you know this, anyone listening to the post games, the podcast knew this. I was pretty unexcited about next year and just kind of the general direction the organization was headed. And so making a change here, I think, improves things and shows that they're still listening and there's some accountability there. And I think that's a very important first step. And by the way, the Kraken officially announced that Dan Bylsma has been relieved of his duties. And so statement from general manager Ron Francis says on the thing, but we, for now, we thank Dan for his commitment and energy he brought to our organization over the past 4 years at the NHL and AHL levels. After a thorough review of the season and our expectations for next year and beyond, we've made the difficult decision to move in a different direction behind the bench. Dan is a great person and a respected coach. He played an important role in the development of many of our young prospects and was a big part in our early success in Coachella Valley. We sincerely wish him and his family nothing but success moving forward. So it is officially official on the Bylsma front that, yeah, the Kraken are making some big changes.
Yeah, and we'll probably get something soon, and we'll see about tomorrow and what that turns into. Again, if they've already booked it with the media, I'm sure you could just kind of change around who's talking and what they're talking about. So hopefully we still have that opportunity tomorrow.
And by the way, in that press release, it does say confirm. Sorry, Francis will address the media tomorrow at 1 p.m. So I imagine if that wasn't happening, they wouldn't have added it there at the bottom. So we still expect to be at KCI tomorrow at 1.
Perfect.
To hear from Francis, and I would imagine Jason Botterill probably.
I would think so. I would think so. Yeah. If not then maybe in the days shortly after.
Yeah. So I think we'll, could still expect that, but certainly we'll talk to Francis tomorrow. And by the way, this is from Ryan Clark confirming all the reports and everything we've just talked about, but also adding Campbell joined last season, has a year left on her contract. Okay. So I didn't know that, but she has 1 year left on her contract. So I imagine they'll probably just reevaluate after next season.
It makes sense. That's probably what I would do in that situation. So, yeah, no, it's all interesting stuff. I mean, I would ask you, right? Like, obviously it's not enough for you, right? And we've already kind of gone down that road. But given you used a certain word a lot about referencing this team kind of down the stretch, and then obviously during this podcast. It starts with an M. It's mediocre. I think the other thing that kind of goes with that is a different M word that some Seattle fans were throwing around with this team. That's Mariners. Although they're doing okay right now. I do wonder.
I reverse jinxed Rowdy Tellez when I went on Fox 13. That's what it is.
That's exactly what it was. Yes. But I do like, is this enough for you? Because you were about as far on the clean house, start over from scratch as somebody could reasonably be, like from still having logic to it all. Is this enough for you? Obviously within the context of how much could actually be done in a 3-month off season or whatever it's going to be, it feels like as much as it could possibly be. But is this enough for somebody who has your position on everything?
Yeah, you know what? It's a very good question, Dylan. And I'll be honest, it's kind of something I need to think about a little bit more.
That's fine.
Because I mean, here's my just initial thoughts. And I kind of mentioned it over the course of this podcast, right? Where I wanted to see some accountability. I felt like my baseline, easiest expectation possible, the most reasonable thing is that there's some acknowledgement that what's happened the last 2 seasons is not okay and the change needs to be made. And until today, I hadn't seen any of that.
Right.
And that's why I was so far. This is what radicalized me, right? Is that they're not acknowledging that anything's wrong. And it so clearly is. And so to at least get that acknowledgement, I'm happy with that at a very basic level. And so
it's backed you off the cliff a little.
Exactly. It's backed me off the cliff. I'm no longer right on the cliff's edge here, ready to jump tomorrow when Ron Francis says that everything's fine and he's still the GM. So I'm not there. That said, it still does concern me that, that Francis is still at the top here. And it does concern me that they did not go with an outside hire for GM, that largely the same brain trust who led to this situation, which I think the organization is acknowledging is not okay and needs to change, is still largely in charge. And on top of that, they got promotions. So that still concerns me, I'll be honest. But I still want to reserve judgment on, because really the most important man here is Jason Botterill. Can he make the changes necessary as a GM to make this roster what it needs to be? And as you said, the Buffalo tenure, not all that eventful. It's hard to judge completely. And so I'm skeptical about Botterill. I want to believe that he's going to do a good job. And I feel like I need to reserve some judgment, at least until I see how he handles this offseason, which will be very eventful. Yeah. So I guess I'm skeptical, but I want to give this configuration a chance. And so as to whether or not that's enough, it's not exactly what I would have done. You know that.
Yeah.
But it is something. And it's certainly an improvement from where we were 24 hours ago. And it shows that, because my real concern was just that from top to bottom, all the way up to ownership, that the organization was in a state where they felt like this was okay. And we know that that's not the case. Whether they've made the right moves to address or not, time will tell. And I will not be shy about saying whether I think they're the right moves or not. I'm going to be very vocal on all the offseason moves and what I think of them. But it shows that, that there is somebody up top that the organization hasn't accepted this and accepted, that M word I used, mediocrity, and, or the Mariners route or whatever. This is, and I want to just say one more time, this is very different ownership than the Seattle Mariners have.
It is. Yes.
These are not the Mariners on ice. I can confirm that. And at least being able to confirm that it's a nice feeling. And again, it's much better than I was feeling 24 hours ago. I don't know. That probably didn't really answer the question, but that's
no, I mean, it does, right? Like it's not as far as you wanted. Again, we acknowledged at the beginning, you were on the extreme as far as how much, right? Like the like truly burn it down levels and everything. But I think that it is a start, right? Like they are acknowledging that things were not going well. That is massive for where they were at. I think it's massive for distinguishing themselves from maybe some other teams out there and other sports and stuff. And so I think that it's a start. I think it's it's as good a start as it can be. Just based on what's gone on. We'll find out about Botterill. Obviously, I think this offseason is going to be important. I guess last thing here to kind of talk about is, I'm thinking in my mind, this group now has 2 years, right? Where they're
That's the
going
other
to
question
they're
too,
going
is
to
how long of
hire
lease do they
they're
have?
going yeah they're going to hire a coach and go through that. And we both, very much believe that this is not a 1 year fix. There is no 1 year offseason fix for this roster unless you truly pull a rabbit out of your hat and you get Connor McDavid or something. That's not happening, and you're not fixing it this year. So I think you need to give them 2 off seasons. I think you're giving this group now 2 more seasons. At the end of that, you're looking at 6 years under, Francis's like larger big picture stuff. You're looking at 6 years under Francis appointee, and you can really judge things at that point. And I know people want to see how all the draft picks are going to grow and develop and all of that stuff. But again, if you did that, you would never move on from a general manager, because they're always going to have prospects growing.
You're gonna keep making picks.
Yeah, like that's just how it works. There's a draft every year, so you can't. Yeah, at some point you have to say enough is enough. But I do think that because of the state of the roster, where they need to get and everything, you're looking at a 2-year plan under this group, and we'll see how aggressive they are. It's the one part about it that really bums me out, because I do think that this is a good start in acknowledging the winning and all of that stuff. I would have really liked if you acknowledged all the winning, you cleaned house completely, and you said, look, we want to kind of start over roster wise and everything wise. You trade a Vince Dunn, you traded a Jared McCann, you load up on picks, and you tank for Gavin McKenna, right? Like that still exists. That's still an option for you. And I guess it's still an option under Botterill and the new look of everything. But like that is an option that exists out there. And it's not just Gavin McKenna next year. Like the draft looks pretty good next year. That is still like an option and potentially something that they're going to have to do at some point in the future anyway. But like with that being like so close and so easy, if you were already taking these steps, you could have just jumped that last hurdle maybe and given us it.
You could have, and I mean, you kind of tackled something.
You already discounted the tickets. Like you were all set up for the tank.
I know.
Like it's
well, that's in my armchair GM stream. My big point to that, and I think kind of the season retrospective podcast we would have had anyway too, was how I just so desperately wanted, beyond the accountability, which we got some of that today, was to pick a direction. Roster right, when you go to the on ice success, you need to pick a direction.
They do.
Either you make really aggressive moves to try and make the playoffs, and give yourself a serious chance to make the playoffs next year. You can't just sign a couple big free agents and every model and everything says you're like an 80-point team, but no, we're gonna make it. We're fine, which is what they did last season. Mm-hmm. You have to actually make a team that like all the experts and models say should be a playoff team. Or you should go in the other direction and just spend at least one season being really bad, try and go get Gavin McKenna, this player who would change your franchise forever, and just not be in the middle. That's the one thing you can't afford to do. And I guess this is still a relevant talking point because it's just Botterill's problem now instead of Francis's. But you have to pick a direction. I am tired of the lack of vision. I'm talking about just on ice success for the team, because clearly the ownership, has a vision here, but I am tired of the lack of vision, from the GM on down, about what this team is and what they need to be. And especially like, with this past season, the revisionist history on that we heard, about how, well, it was a developing season, all this sort of thing. You don't sign a Stevenson and Montour if you're not seriously expecting to make the playoffs. And I want to see a direction picked. I want to see a clear vision for this team. And I hope it's one that Jason Botterill lays out tomorrow and Ron Francis lays out tomorrow. Although I acknowledge there's limits to how much they can say, but really I hope they do it with their actions over the course of the offseason. That's really what I'm expecting. But I want to see this team pick a direction. I do not want them to see them be an 11 seed in the West, a 10 seed in the West next season. Even if it means you're kind of playing some competitive games, maybe in March, whatever, pick a direction, because for the long-term success of this team, that's what you need. And if you're focused on the long-term success of this team, I mean, that's why you make the moves today. If you're not all that concerned about this team really being a contender long-term, you just let things be and you don't make the moves you made today. So clearly that should be a priority. I believe it is a priority for the organization, judged on their actions today. You have to pick a decision and try and get those results.
Yeah, no, can't say it any better than that. I think that's a good place to leave it. Want to thank everybody for for joining us, for listening, and all that good stuff. And again, we literally, the Dan news broke and we just started recording. Like, we had not
We hit the
communicated
record button immediately.
anything to each other at all yet. So like, this is literally
Very
everything
raw.
that we can
It's
think
just our
of.
thoughts, unfiltered.
Yeah, definitely. And it turned into this deep dive. Again, one more time, thanks to the lobsters of Rico Tessendorf for being there
For
to help
impromptu
you through.
sponsoring this podcast.
Right, to help you through your emergencies, just like helps us through this emergency deep dive. And if well, we hope you never need his services. If you do at some point, you can contact Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website ricotessendor.com to schedule a free consultation. Thanks for listening, everybody. Definitely want to hear everybody's thoughts on this one. I know we're going to be hearing everybody's thoughts on this one for a while to come. But thanks for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah, we'll see you then. Oh my gosh.